Thank you all for joining us for our SICSS-Howard Mathematica Roundtable entitled Personal Experiences of African Americans in the Academy. I am joined today by Dr. Carter Clinton, Dr. Sandra Kalu, Dr. William Spriggs, and Dr. Shannell Thomas. I will begin by introducing our panelists. Let's go ahead and spotlight them. Dr. Carter Clinton is a postdoctoral scholar at Pennsylvania State University in the departments of anthropology and biology, a National Geographic explorer, and a Cosmos Foundation scholar. He is a 2021 graduate of the Department of Biology at Howard University and former assistant curator at the W. Montague Cobb Research Laboratory. I heard it on good information that he may have been Howard's Graduate Student of the Year too. Dr. Clinton's research explores the lifestyles and causes of death of the 17th and 18th century New York African burial ground population, a community of free and enslaved Africans who once lived in present-day Manhattan. Dr. Sandra Kalu is an assistant professor in Howard University School of Social Work. She brings over 5 years of experience as a social worker in private, public, and nonprofit sectors. Sandra received a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology and a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from the North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University in 2013. She then obtained her Master's of Social Work from the Ohio State University in May 2017. Sandra received her doctoral degree from the University of Houston in 2021. Dr. Kalu's research agenda explores the influence of Black girls' academic experiences on their gendered racial identity development and their psychological, social, emotional, and educational success pathways. Dr. William Spriggs is a professor in and former chair of the Department of Economics at Howard University and serves as the chief economist to the AFL-CIO. In his role with the AFL-CIO, he chairs the Economic Policy Group for the Trade Union Advisory Committee to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development and serves on the board of the National Bureau of Economic Research. I don't know about y'all, but there's some good data at the NBER, so we should talk to him about that. He is currently the president-elect of the Labor Employment Research Association. Prior to this position, from 2009 to 2012, Bill was appointed by President Obama and confirmed by the U.S. Senate to serve as Assistant Secretary for the Office of Policy at the United States Department of Labor. And finally, Dr. Shannell Thomas is a recent graduate of Howard University's Department of Sociology and Criminology, is an assistant professor in the Criminal Justice Program at Bowie State University, holds a Master in Education and Curriculum and Instruction from the University of South Florida, and a Master's in Humanities and Social Thought from NYU. She teaches criminal justice sociology and statistics courses at Bowie State and has instructed a variety of justice-related and methodological courses at American University, George Washington University, and Montgomery College. Professor Thomas's research interests are centered around the language of the criminal justice system, specifically during the prosecution and sentencing phases, and on the political impacts of criminal justice. Thank you all for joining us. I'll begin by asking a few questions about your path to the PhD. Anyone can answer. Feel free to unmute yourself and just jump in. Then I will ask you all to reflect on particular responsibilities and challenges of being Black in the Academy. And then we'll open up the floor to audience members. So as we go, audience members, start thinking about your questions. When I open it up, we'll start to take questions via hands. We'll spotlight you, so you'll get a chance to be on camera while you speak to the people or peoples you wish to ask a question. Just a reminder, questions end with a question mark and do not have extensive 5-minute long exposition in front of them. Okay, thank you. Questions, which I'm kind of doing right now. For this first set of questions, any of you can answer, all of you can answer. I have 3 questions. All right, so let's start with what steps did you take to prepare you for a career in academia? Who wants to jump in on that one?
I mean, I can go ahead and kind of jump in. So I think what was interesting about my career trajectory is it actually started in student affairs, right? And so I did start out as a person in the residence hall, a resident director at Penn State University, and then I transferred over to UC Berkeley. And I was really enjoying the service part of being on a college campus. But then I had the opportunity to teach a couple of social justice courses. And I surprised myself at the extent to which I enjoyed being in the classroom and kind of engaging with students in a different way other than being kind of in the student affairs side. So really, it was kind of an epiphany for me that I really wanted to kind of cast a different net, maybe so to speak, and start doing things a little different. what I appreciated is because of my social justice work and the work in student affairs, I actually had some connections to some folks on the campus who were who could serve as some faculty mentors. And so as I thought to myself, how am I going to make this transition? There were people there that were able to support me in that tradition, and African-American mentors, right, who were able to say, okay, if you want to get in academia, here's some things that you need to consider. Here's some ways to put your best foot forward. So I really appreciated having that. So that was kind of my entree into academia.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas. Love how many UC Berkeley Bears are in the room. Just throwing that out there. Yes, there's at least 4 of us. Okay, anyone else? What steps did you take to prepare for your career? Who else wants to jump in?
So I'll jump in. I think that the typical thing that you think about in grad school and then going anywhere beyond that is becoming an expert in your field. And I think that's just what the PhD is. But, I like how, Dr. Shannell just, mentioned the networking part, which is a huge component of where you go after you get the degree. So personally for me, I went out, I got the training, I took classes at UMB, GW, but what was really just like a priority and very important was my position as the assistant curator of the lab. And that's where I learned kind of the other side, the administrative, the political side. It's so much more about handshaking and back scratching, right? So you need the network to grow as a researcher, to grow your lab. And, I, like other researchers or other graduate students, would say yes to kind of every opportunity that I was presented, just because I knew that it would open so many doors for me. And those opportunities, even to this day, some of those people are still contacts. They've led to co-authored publications, letters of recommendation, and even job offers right after graduation.
Thank you.
I'll jump in. So this is a great question. And I think, as I started my career, I was more focused on the research piece because my practice definitely informed that. And I think that was a priority for me when I was starting academia. And I didn't pay much attention to teaching, like the art of teaching, which is a very big part of academia. And so when my mentor let me know that I needed to focus on that, I started, doing teaching assistantships because I wanted to kind of make sure that I showed up, effectively as a professor. And so I think that was just something that was very important to me, to kind of understand what is expected of me as a teacher, as a professor in the classroom, and kind of hone in on those skills, because it gets very intense during the semester as an assistant professor. So being able to have that little bit of experience before stepping into the classroom was very important.
I don't know that I started out thinking about it in the way that you asked the question, but I did take an advantage of being a teaching assistant while I was a graduate student, but I also took advantage of my long student activism. And so that made me a student rep on various university committees. And that gave me another view, the administrative side of things, serving on those committees, as well as my activism and being a teaching assistant. I was the co-president of the Teaching Assistants Association at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So that added to my activism, since that is a union. It's one of the largest locals in Wisconsin because the TAA represents over 1,800 graduate and teaching assistants at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So I think those are the steps that I took. Being an active student leader gets you access to being on committees that you wouldn't normally be exposed to, so that when you get to be a faculty member, you already understand some of the committee's faculty members end up having to serve on.
I have to make sure I say thank you for your service, Dr. Spriggs. For the four of us here at Berkeley, we have a union of graduate students. So it's so incredibly important, the work that you're doing. And I know all of us are excited to hear about your work, as well as Dr. Thomas. Dr. Sandra, am I pronouncing that correct? Is that Sandra, and is it Kalu? Saying names correctly is so important to me. I have that extra I in my name, so it's Nanette. People mess it up all the time. And Carter. My next question for all of you is, could you talk about and can you describe the life of an academic as you see it, in the way that your sort of life is unfolded? Do we want to do the reverse order? So maybe we start with Dr. Spriggs and then loop back around the other way.
Well, I never stopped my activism. That goes back to being in the midst of integration of the public schools when I was growing up. And I never stopped being a student activist. So my academic life continues that activism. I'm a scholar that looked up to those scholars who were activists. So I use them as role models in what I do, both in my research, but also in pursuing my activism. So for me, the life of an academic is a continuation of all of that. I think that too often we only think about, research that goes to others in the academy as what helps us be better teachers, because it keeps us up with our discipline and, provides the material, particularly if you're in a doctoral granting institution, the material for you to keep your students on the cutting edge. But I find that my activism and being involved in real policy debates does more for me, and I think for my students, because the academic research is so often out of touch with the real world. It's contemplative and it can be done sort of on your own, so it doesn't force you to engage the real world. So even those who are doing very sympathetic and conscious work don't always know what the specifics are of the debate. So a lot of academics do great work, and sometimes they get lucky because their work informs the current debate, but the debate, the public debate, ends up being about very specific issues. And knowing what the real debate is, I find very helpful. And it keeps you from being naive as a researcher. So many people don't get, what are they really saying? And you can find your research suddenly being used for things you personally wouldn't support, because you're not thinking through, how are people going to use what I just did? And so I think looking at the results of your work through the lens of people actually engaged in making policy is vitally important. And, fortunately, there are more schools that like public scholars and are willing to create space for people to develop as public scholars. And hopefully there'll be more of them. But I think that's an element of my career that I'm glad that I have. And part of, what Dr. Clinton was saying, I mean, the other part that you do as a faculty member is help your students network. And by being actively engaged, you have an additional network that you can introduce your students to and help get them connected to. And for a field like economics, which is used very heavily in public policy, my students absolutely benefit from me being able to put them on the field. Their work gets into the flow. I was very proud when each year the Council of Economic Advisors to the President puts out the President's Economic Report. And I was very proud when they cited one of my students because she and I had been working on the issue of how the unemployment insurance system functioned during the COVID crisis. And so she got to be in the President's report. There's a little citation and a footnote that cites her. So that wouldn't happen if I just played the academic game. My students wouldn't have gotten that kind of exposure.
Thank you so much. Can we get maybe another perspective? Does someone want to add on to that? Or there are things that you would add? Or shall we move on to the next question? Oh, Sandra,
Yeah.
yes, Dr. Kalu.
Okay, yes, I was just gonna say, like, from my perspective as a first year faculty member at Howard, I think for me, when I think about my life in academia, it's really all about balance. And I haven't found it yet, I'm gonna be honest. I'm still looking for that. But you know, being a professor is very, your schedule is very flexible. And so you really have to like create a schedule for yourself, because you want to make sure that you're showing up in, you know, every aspect of what you're expected, right? You want to make sure that you're planning your classes. You want to make sure that you're giving great feedback to your students when you're grading papers. You want to make sure that you're in the communities doing work. Like I said earlier, my practice really informs, you know, my teaching and my research. So you want to make sure that you're getting that experience, still balancing your time in the community. And you want to make sure that, you know, like some of, you know, my colleagues mentioned, just you're networking and you're helping your students network. And also you're writing every day, if you could fit that into your schedule. Like all of these things are very important. So you have to balance that on top of still having a life outside of work, right? Spending time with family, spending time with friends, because that's your self-care. So it's a balancing act, but you create your schedule. So you have to, you know, prioritize those things that are important to you and important to being successful on the tenure track.
Dr. Thomas, you want to jump in?
I did, thank you. So one of the things that I think has been kind of interesting for me in terms of my own self-development is finding kind of new facets of research of the discipline for criminal justice that I've actually been interested in. And actually, so I want to credit Dr. Spriggs and Dr. Adams, who's in the audience, just with giving me access and exposure to working with data science, right? And because data science and statistics is not something that I came into the academy thinking, oh, I'm going to do that. Let's do math together. Let's do statistics. And in terms of what Dr. Spriggs had referred to earlier, in terms of being able to sit on specific committees and kind of get exposure to the types of details, information, knowledge, and research that is being done on the faculty level, that was really helpful for me. Because I was able to get mentorship as I started to learn different forms of quantitative research. And so I really appreciated that. And I would say, I think being open to doing things or pursuing different academic interests outside of what you went into the academy for, right? So like my department at Bowie State University is a really collaborative department. And so they're consistently pulling one another in to different research ideas. And so just the notion of being open has been really helpful to me as I think about where I want to take my career and what I'm interested in writing about, doing research on, and really pulling students into, right? We do have lots of different programs where we can pull students into our research. And that's also been helpful for me, like to encourage kind of the next generation to think about what's next. What do you want to see coming to the forefront of knowledge as we kind of move forward? So yeah, it's gonna.
Thank you. We're going to jump into our next question, and I want to direct this to Dr. Clinton, because I think he's closer to figuring this out. As a lot of us, so you're in a room full of PhD students, some candidates, junior scholars, and some postdocs. So we'd love to know, how have you met your annual professional goals? Like, you have a postdoc now, so you're doing this well. Conference papers, publications, or outreach work, and also balance that with teaching responsibilities when you were teaching. Because again, I heard you got like #1 grad student at Howard, so you're apparently killing the game here. So please enlighten us, Dr. Clinton.
Yeah, well, that graduate student of the year, I think for most people, when you think, would you ever do a PhD again? And people are like, no. That's why you do not find people who have 2 PhDs, right? It's something I will not do. But I really embraced that, and I took it as, this is where I'm starting, this is my endpoint, and I'm gonna make the best of it. And it really showed, in my accolades and the awards that I won and things like that. So that's a piece of advice to grad students sitting in the audience. But to answer the question, my annual professional goals, first, it's going to be very different from what that means, what those goals are as a graduate student, what they are as a professor. So I kind of wanted to give a short of what my goals look like, or as a postdoc, period. So really it's and this is taken right from the Penn State postdoc website, to function as a preparatory time for our careers, to publish results of our research or scholarship during the period of appointment, and to obtain technical training and opportunities for professional and career development. So when it comes to my situation as a postdoc, it's a little bit unique in that usually coming in, postdocs have a project, or you're there to push research forward. But because I had this very kind of heavy impact as a graduate student, I came with my interests and my tools, and my advisor brought his research interests, and we created a project. So the first year for me was really getting the ball rolling, really formulating a project, getting the data to conduct analyses. I did publish 2 papers, which I didn't have any specific number since I didn't have a project coming in. And those papers were from the work that I did at Howard. But this year, I've made several strides in my professional development. So attending conferences, workshops, UGGR at Underground Railroad at Lincoln University, the ones from my field, American Association for Biological Anthropologists, training here, training at Penn State, because they have the 2nd largest ancient DNA lab in the country. So I've kind of fulfilled that part. But I think the most important and the thing I'm really thankful for is that my advisor has been extremely supportive in my endeavor to expand my science communication presence. So in short, the work that I did for my PhD was picked up by National Geographic. I went on to do several videos, something for the Science Channel, documentaries, and these things I put under my professional development. And kind of going back to what Dr. Spriggs said, it's really important to have our stories told by people who look like us, from voices that sound like ours, from people who share these same grounded cultural experiences. So sometimes when you move into these positions, whether it's a postdoc or anything else, development looks like all shapes, sizes, and forms. It's not, cookie cutter to what you think it may look like.
Thank you for that, Dr. Clinton. I'd like to jump in since we started a little late, unfortunately. So I want to make sure we leave enough time for our students to ask questions. But I want to direct some questions to each of you. We have, I'd say, probably about 10 minutes before we jump into questions with our students, maybe a little bit longer. Why don't we start with Dr. Thomas and Dr. Kalu. So I'd love to hear about what your experience has been like on your first year in the tenure track. And I think I'm correct. You're both first year tenure track. Am I correct? Yes. I'd love to know about that. What is the pressure like to produce, and how do you balance that with their course load? I think this is a great follow-on to Dr. Clinton's thoughts on postdocs.
Okay.
Odds or evens? Come on, rock, paper, scissors.
Dr. Thomas. It's been a lot for me, just because I finished my degree I defended my dissertation August 6th, and I started as a professor August 17th. So it was a very quick transition for me, and I moved back to DC from Texas during that time. So I guess I didn't really have a break or time to prepare, and so I just jumped right in. And so it was like the transition was heavy for me. However, I have the best colleagues and the best dean who helped me with that transition. Anything that I needed, any support I needed as far as like, you know, getting startup funds, or, you know, getting my classes, my syllabus done, or anything, like I just had that support. And I think that's so very important, because a lot of people don't have that when they first start in academia. And going along that idea, when I think about publishing or writing in my program, I came in with one other professor, and there was a professor who came in a year before us. So we collaborate a lot when it comes to writing. Like, we all think of ideas that we want to write about, and then we talk about how we could separate sections so that we can get papers out really, really quickly. And so that pressure to publish, it didn't seem so heavy, because I had a team around me, which is just so important to me. But I think one thing that was very, I guess, difficult for me as well is the teaching part, just because my previous teaching had been virtual because, you know, COVID. And so my first year, we actually came back into the classroom. And so I had to, it's a bit different when you're teaching in a classroom than online, and how you engage with the students. So that was a bit of a challenge, but like I said, most of the professors in my program have decades of experience in teaching, so I was able to rely on them to kind of get me to the mark that I wanted to be an effective professor. So I think the theme of this is just like, you know, your team is so important, and being open to receiving help is so important, and asking for help. Sometimes we feel like we have to do things on our own to show that, you know, we are like we're supposed to be here, I guess, right? But your team is so important, and just rely on that. Yeah.
So I feel like I would love to echo what Dr. Kalu said. The importance of having a collaborative collegial team just really, I think, cannot be understated or overstated, cannot be overstated. I think I got lucky relative to a number of other first-year PhDs because I had been adjuncting at Bowie State University prior to getting the tenure track position, which means that I had some familiarity with the colleagues, I had some familiarity with the students. And so I didn't feel like I was just kind of thrown into this new environment and flailing, right, to figure it all out at the same time while I was, you know, trying to get my research under wraps. So I think the thing that was actually hardest for me is because when I was in graduate school, I think I spent a lot of time hustling. And I was like, how am I going to get this thing done? I need to pay my rent. I need to do this job. I need to get this thing. Like, how many different projects can I possibly put on my tray at one time? Like, how many different places can I throw my hat to make sure that I'm a viable candidate for a tenure track position, but also that I have the levels of skills that I want moving forward. And my chair actually made me laugh recently. He was like, you know, you can calm down. Like, you can stop now, right? Like, we need to focus on the research. and the teaching. And so you can kind of pull some of that stuff back. And I think for me, that was kind of the transition to being like, okay, you can stop feeling like you have to hustle. Like the thing that you've been hustling for, you actually have now. And so relax into focusing on how to do this all very, very well. And I will say, I think what has been really, I'll say edifying, what has been really edifying is coming back into the classroom and being able to engage with students. And for me, I teach elementary statistics, and that can be a labor of love, we'll say that, right? It can be a labor of love for students, especially because they often take it right before they're getting ready to graduate, and they're like, I have to pass, right? And so being able to engage with students through their desperation is quite an endeavor sometimes. But it's those moments that I realize I did the right thing, like I got to the right place. Like it just feels so good. And I want that for everyone, all folks who are like getting ready to find positions. Like I want that experience of I'm in the right place. I did the right thing. This feels good. Like I have the colleagues I need. The students are great. Yeah, that's just kind of my hope for everyone.
I'm going to give our last question that comes from me, unless our participants are shy. So participants, please start getting your questions in mind, get those hands up, and we will start calling on people after this question. This is to Dr. Spriggs. So you have held and continue to hold important positions outside of academia. So serves as the Assistant Secretary for the Office of Policy at the Department of Labor under President Obama, and currently serve as the Chief Economist of the AFL-CIO. What are the benefits and challenges of this work?
The biggest challenge is what Dr. Kalu mentioned, which is life balance, because essentially I'm doing 3 full-time jobs almost at the same time, which is why I normally don't like to do things on the weekend, because I have to do so much travel and end up at different conferences and being away from my family on the weekend. But as I mentioned before, it keeps me abreast of what's the current debate. And especially for my students, it means I give them this opportunity to engage with research at the cutting edge. So I think it's just a very good melding. Those connections have helped out the polling initiative that we have at Howard University. So Dr. Thomas and I worked together a lot when she was a graduate student, because she was vital to analyzing that polling data. But a number of the clients that we had from the polling center came from my activism. So our first one came out of when I was the head of the National Urban League's Washington office. It meant that I worked very closely with Get Out the Vote efforts and the Black network of people who do civic participation. So I was already connected with the folks who would be very fascinated and be willing to pay for us to do a national poll on how Black voters view things. And so that got us engaged, helped raise some money so we could hire Dr. Thomas when she was a grad student. And she wasn't just, I love the concept of students should deal with live grenades. That is something of real consequence, not, something that, oh, it just gets buried, my professor reads and who cares. But the polling that she helped us with was live. It influenced the news, it made the news cycle, it was real. This year, the U.S. International Trade Commission, because of President Biden's focus on what's supposed to happen to middle-class America, our trade policy is changing. And the U.S. International Trade Commission is now concerned with, well, how does trade impact people? So I'm very happy. I have 2 really super talented grad students who helped do work that became part of the current national debate. They got hired. I got them a contract So they got paid to do this work and do it for a very good think tank called the Groundwork Collaborative. And then that research, hopefully it's going to be a journal article for them, but it's part of the active debate that's taking place now about how the United States is going to shape trade policy. So without being at the actual table and understanding what are people looking for, what's the information scholars really have to bring, and without having the prominence at the table, it means, you know, I couldn't bring along my students for this. So I look at it as the way, you know, many people look at when they do their research. I do the research so that I can make sure that my students are using current methods and learning the skills to be successful when they leave so they can do things that can be published. But I look at it as how can I make sure that my students will be relevant. So I'm very proud. One of our students works for the Washington Center for Equitable Growth, which is Washington think tank that funds research to diversify economic policy thought. Those kind of jobs and connections come about through me continuing to be an active participant in the public debate. And so that's how I look at it. It keeps me going. I've always been an activist, and it lets me stay in the debate. I don't think I would be happy if I had to retreat and not be part of the debate. So fortunately, I have that opportunity at Howard. And fortunately, you know, the other thing about being at Howard is it's a candy store of Black intellectual power. The thing I miss the most is we used to have a space when faculty could get together to eat lunch together. And for anybody who's, you know, curious, it was always wonderful because we are the repository of so many Black PhDs. And you can sit down and talk to a Black physicist who's telling you insights about why race matters and who gets to do physics. And our engineering faculty, our School of Communications faculty, all of our faculty have people who it's just so much fun to be around and to have these kind of conversations that I know I couldn't have anywhere else, and colleagues that keep you from feeling isolated, not just because, you know, your own field, but isolated from a much richer and deeper conversation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Spriggs. I find your comments so inspiring because I'm a bit of a non-traditional student. I started my PhD in my late 30s after being part of the debate. So I came from the U.S. Trade Representative's office. I was Korea, Japan, and APEC and Southeast Asia and Pacific Affairs expert and negotiator over there. So it's sometimes I think I forget that all that stuff happened, that it still has use because, you know, you start a PhD and they're like, you're at the beginning again. So thank you. I want to open up space for questions from the field. So we have 3 folks to get us started. I believe our first is Asha. Asha, please turn on your camera and we will spotlight you and ask your question.
Hi, so thank you for sharing your enriched experiences. My question is, you know, can you share moments when you doubted yourself and how you overcame? Like imposter syndrome is such a real thing in academia. So either it's when you were a PhD student or transitioning from your student life to, you know, professorship or during professorship. Thank you.
I'll start. Because I experience that often. I am first generation, everything education in my family. So undergrad, grad, PhD, and now I'm a professor, and I'm the youngest person in my program. And so everyone around me has so much experience. And when I first started, I questioned whether I had enough experience to teach a class, if my students were really benefiting from my perspective in the classroom, when they could learn from like professors who know so much more. And when I had those thoughts, I talked with my colleagues and was just reminded that everyone has different perspectives, right, that they bring to the university and to the classroom. And I was also reminded that I don't have to know everything. Like, I'm going to learn things from my students, and that doesn't make me a bad professor or a person who's not knowledgeable enough to teach and to do research. And so I think just not holding it in and having conversations, because you're not the only person who feel that way. Like, there are so many different other people, other colleagues who feel the same way. And so for you not to feel isolated and for you to kind of be affirmed, make sure you're having those conversations with your colleagues. I think that's really what helped me.
Just to add to that, really quickly, I agree 100% with all that, right? It's probably every other week that I tweet something about my imposter syndrome. I will only reply from my computer because my signature is on there so people can know I have my degree. But that's where you really lean on your network. And it doesn't have to, if you can't separate the two and look at yourself and say, I've come this far, you really need to lean on your network. And that can be your colleagues, your mentor, your sister, your puppy, literally anything that will put you in a space where you're mentally available to see your purpose, to realize how far you've come, because even at this stage, you've come so much farther than others, but you also have come so much farther than you have. Well, the road ahead of you is longer, but depending on where you are with those milestones, you probably have come farther than you have to go.
Our next question is from Daniel. We have two other people in the queue after him, Christina and Javante, but thank you for turning your camera on, Daniel. Go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you, Nanette, and thank you to the panelists. This has all been very helpful. My question was if y'all could talk about things that you wish you did differently, maybe things that we should think about avoiding in our own journeys. One example I have in my mind is just like people asking you to join like an anti-racism committee or something, and maybe how we should be thinking about those sort of extracurricular responsibilities. Thank you.
I mean, I guess if I could just jump in, I think you have to start off thinking about the end in mind. Right. And so what's available for you if you are thinking, I want to go to an HBCU and work at an HBCU, those anti-racism committees are quite viable, right? Those are appropriate spaces for you to spend your time in. That might not be okay if you're going to an institution that is a little bit more conservative and doesn't value those types of conversations or those types of pursuits, so to speak. I would say I think, and it's not a regret, but it's a thing that I'm really actually very happy that I did, that I want to kind of offer up for people, that when people made suggestions about what academia currently needs in terms of data scientists and in terms of criminal justice persons, because when I started, I had some very definitive paths laid out for myself in terms of what types of sociology that I wanted to study. And someone suggested, there are a plethora of sociologists in the world. We might want to think of something a little different, right? And so like, how can you change your trajectory to make it possible for you to get that job out of graduate school? What can you add to your plate in terms of skills that might put you head and shoulders above other folks? And so had I not done the things that were suggested, I would be looking back with regret now. So I kind of want to offer that when people say to you from their knowledge base, here are some additional ways in which you might be thinking about shaping your career. Don't take those lightly, really consider those possibilities for yourself.
I know we're short on time, but I think, as Dr. Thomas was saying, one of the things was I pursued a career. All of my teaching positions, all three have been at HBCUs, and it was to avoid being on those kind of committees. I wanted to devote my academic life, my academic time, to addressing students and not facing being an advocate again. I spent 8 years as a student advocate at PWIs. I had no interest in doing that as a faculty member. So do I kind of regret that I didn't take on that challenge? In some ways I do. I look back at my undergraduate alma mater and think, gee, they've only had one Black econ professor in the history of the college. And wouldn't it be nice for those who will be following in my direct footsteps if they had, you know, somebody on faculty? But I've traded that for the legacy that I will be producing more Black PhDs than I ever could being at one of those campuses. So, I mean, I guess sometimes I think about, you know, legacy-wise, I feel more fulfilled because I'm going to leave more people with my skill set. But am I being fair because don't I owe a debt to those who are, if someone looked at my biography and said, I want to follow your footsteps, I'm not helping you follow my footsteps. So I guess I feel torn about that.
Thank you, Dr. Spriggs. Our next question is from Christina.
Hi, all. Thank you so much for sharing with us all of your wisdom. One of the things that I'm curious about, and I understand that pretty much all of you are in places that where, you know, there's a lot of Black folks around, but you're not necessarily in fields where like you show up at the conference and, you know, there are a ton of Black folks around. So I'm curious about how you have been able to build community within your broader discipline outside of your program or outside of your department.
I'm going to follow with that. And I made a scheduling mistake. This weekend is the pipeline conference for minorities in economics. And I made a mistake and I didn't put it on my calendar correctly. But seek out within your professional organization. All of us have a Black wing within that. And I have always been active with the National Economic Association, which is the Association for Black Economists. And sometimes people discourage you from doing that, but absolutely do that, because that gives you that network and the connections and people who can help you. I have seen so many very talented young economists who, you know, sort of poo-poo, oh, you're a bunch of old guys, you're stuck in the 60s or something like that. And they come around about 6 years later when they're up for tenure. And then they're crying to the rest of us. And they've missed this huge opportunity for mentorship, for collegiality. Many other organizations have a research journal. We have a research journal out of our organization. I know they do in political science. And there's Abby Sy for psychologists. There's a Black sociologist group. I encourage you to be active.
We have a question from Jovante.
I'll put my hand down. Well, the question that I wanted to ask you guys was, with everything that's going on now, or everything that you guys experienced while in your programs, pursuing your PhDs, how did you guys avoid letting life interfere with your work and your focus?
I'll chime in on this one. I would recommend, before I even say it, I would recommend that you don't do what I did. Like I said, I kind of made graduate school my life. Graduate school, the PhD, and the assistant curatorship, where I was taking care of so much of the academic side that I really let a lot of my personal side falter. So I didn't go home for holidays. I didn't go, I was in the lab on my birthday. Like I literally went home one Thanksgiving in my last year. And looking back, it's something that I will never, ever, ever recommend to any other graduate student. For me, it got me to where I want to go, but I think there are values, life lessons, life experiences that you do not want to miss out on because of work. So I would say, as Dr. Kalu said, it's all about scheduling. No matter what level where you are in your career, you have to take time for the work, a little bit of pleasure, a little bit of, networking, and a little bit of vacation too. Make sure you get out, because we think that because we don't do, as academics, because we don't do this physical work, that the mental work is not as exhausting, but it really is. And you really have to take that time to kind of reevaluate, and it actually helps you become more productive, to kind of step away from things and to come back to things. So scheduling, placing boundaries, knowing when to say no, and taking that time for yourself is vital.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I want to first say that I don't think there's a way to not let outside life interfere with your work, because it's all life. It's all the same thing. You just have to figure out ways to like bounce back, like once those things do interfere with what you have going on. But I think as students, it's important for you to think about like how you want your life to look when you're a professor, and you have to prioritize whatever you feel is important. So if it's important for you to have a balance, you have to start kind of, like Dr. Clinton said, putting those boundaries in place now. Like, for example, my experience was totally different from his. I went home every holiday and I took breaks because that's what was important to me. I lived away from my family for over 10 years. So being able to see them was priority. And I let my professors know, I let my colleagues know that that's what, those are, my priorities at the end of the day. And luckily, I came into a program who value family just as much as I do. So there's an understanding there. So I think it also goes into like the culture of where you are as well, and which allows you to set those boundaries and reinforce them when need be.
So I actually had to laugh when Dr. Kalu said I went home like religiously for like vacations and things, because I also did that, right? But I want to offer, listen to the people around you, right? Because my daughter would say, you're a workaholic, like you're working all the time. And I was thinking, no, I'm absolutely not, like that's not what's happening here. Or my parents would be like, we love that you come home all the time, but the nerve of you to come home and bring work, right? So I would always be doing work. I would always have something that I needed to finish or get done or start a project. And so my balance was, I'm going to come home, but I'm also not going to be engaged with you in the way that you need me to. And so like really hearing when people in your life are saying, this is how you look, right? You're thinking you're doing, wonderful life balance things, but in actuality, really, you're still being a workaholic, right? So pull yourself back, like figure out like, how can you exist in this space with us separately, but also, do the things, accomplish all the different parts of your life that you want to accomplish.
Since I am the moderator, I am going to get the last question in. I'm going to take control of that there. Ha ha ha. My last question, and I'm hoping you'll all reflect on it. My colleagues have agreed to stick around until 1:15. Some of them are stepping out for biological, technological, sociological, physiological breaks, but many are also here. My final question is, with all the added responsibilities and challenges that we face in the academy, what has made you stay?
Well, for me, it's a question of legacy. When you're gone, where did you leave? And I'm specific, as I mentioned, I'm specifically at Howard because the work has been done by my predecessors on the faculty here that we have established a department that produces more Black people who will get a PhD in economics than anywhere else. So when I'm gone, I will have continued that tradition, and I will have contributed more Black PhDs in economics than anybody else could or would. And so I will feel I did my job.
I guess for me, what makes me stay is, and no offense to those who come from these different institutions, but I did have the opportunity. I was at NYU, I worked at Penn State for a while, and I was at UC Berkeley. And I have to be honest, like those moments, while they have some, those times in my life, while I do have some really positive memories, they were really scarring at points, right? So that as preeminent as those institutions are seen, there were moments where I did feel like there was violence against me as a person of color, as a woman of color. And that is really jarring in terms of people trying to carve out an identity for themselves. And so for me, once I went to Howard, I really felt like, not that all institutions don't have their issues, but I really felt like I could take a deep breath, right? I really could just inhale deeply and really experience myself as I hadn't experienced myself yet. And then moving on to Bowie State, right? I still am very connected to Howard University, but moving on to Bowie State, that same experience, that just like, this feels home, right? And I've heard people say it before, and I was like, really though, does it? But it really does. This notion that there's a safety there that I haven't had in the other institutions that I've been at. And I realize it translates into the classroom, because the way that students engage in classroom environments when they're talking about things that are important, when they're talking about the various violences that they're experiencing in different systems, when we're talking about how to mitigate those things, how to in their generation think about things differently and take action upon those things, like it just feels different. And so I stay because I enjoy those conversations, and I enjoy being in spaces with students who are needing to feed off of my wisdom, right? And also teach me things. It's reaffirming. I'll say that. Like I'm affirmed by the work that I do, and I appreciate that.
So I'll jump in. With all of the challenges, why do I stay? I think the bottom line is I belong here. No matter what the field tells us, what the discipline tells us, what the world tells us, I am entitled to a space here. And it's important to, especially with the work that I do, that again, it is delivered by someone who looks like me, right? Who is doing the science and is telling the interpretations of that science in an ethically responsible and accurate way, right? To use the example of the Buffalo shooter, who in his manifesto used all of these genetic studies to support his agenda. But what we really should be looking at is the interpretation of that data, right? How is it delivered in this kind of neo-eugenic kind of way? And it is necessary to have researchers, again, who look like us, to do the research for us and by us, and also to tell those stories, right? Like tomorrow is Juneteenth, right? And we need so many different aspects to celebrate for that Jubilee, right? Not just, you know, it takes a village, right? So we need humanities, we need the sciences, we need, I feel like I am probably doing a fraction because I'm only one person. We need so much, there's so much more work that needs to be done. And not even listening, you know, to Dr. Spriggs, I don't consider myself, I've never defined myself as an activist, but I think it's a necessary component of doing the work. Like it's necessary to be present, to do it the right way, and to kind of get that message up. I mean, even the visibility for those coming after me to say, hey, he looks like me, I can do this. I can get a PhD, I can be a geneticist, I can do A, B, and C. That's really the take home for me.
I agree with what everyone said. For me, I stay here because I feel like I know what my experience was as a student at a PWI, and I want to make sure that I create classrooms where you know, Black and Brown students feel seen and feel heard. And so I keep that at the forefront of, you know, every lecture that I plan, every activity that I do with the students. But also I know that, you know, the research that I do is important. And if I didn't do it, or if we didn't do it, then it wouldn't get done. And in my research, I center, you know, the Black woman experience. So continuing to see why that's necessary in everyday life is kind of what helps me like see the importance of my work and informs my position here in academia. So, yeah.
Thank you all for an incredible panel. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Carter, Dr. Kalu, Dr. Spriggs, and Dr. Thomas. Thank you all for watching. And I would also be remiss if I do not thank two of our SICSS-Howard Mathematica site faculty sponsors who are in the room. Professor Adams and Professor Jenkins, can you please turn on your cameras so we can see you if you are in the audience? We are because they are. So thank you both for joining us. You all will get a chance to get to know them as the weeks go on, but I want to make sure you see them. Thank you all. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you all for watching. For more information on SICSS-Howard Mathematica, visit our website, follow us on social media, and join our email list.